Welcome to the Israel-Palestine Report with Professor Alon Burstein. We're going to be covering a lot of things on this live stream tonight. It's nice to see some of the familiar faces already joining. We're going to start from talking about something that was discussed many times during the war, but since then has sort of fallen off the radar, and that is the casualty lists that are happening in the Gaza Strip. How many people have been killed in the war? How many of them were militants? How many of them were civilians? It was a very controversial topic, and there were some interesting developments that happened over the past week. After that, we're also going to talk a little bit about the recent spirals that have happened in the Gaza Strip. Just this past weekend, we've had another flare-up of violence, another incident with Hamas operatives emerging in Rafah, and then massive airstrikes throughout the Strip, killing, according to reports, at least 32 people. We're going to talk about that. We're also then going to talk a little bit about the humanitarian situation in Gaza and where things stand with regards to the humanitarian aid coming in, the end of phase 1, continuing on to phase 2. Linked to that, Rafah crossing is supposed to open tomorrow. We're going to talk about how that's going to work, why now, and are Palestinians going to be allowed to exit and enter? How is all that going to work, and what's going to be the mechanisms there? And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the developments. I already uploaded the video about this, about the new Gaza plan that was presented by the Board of Peace. What does it include? What can we expect now officially? Phase 1 is over. So technically, what are we looking for in phase 2? Going to talk about that and obviously take any questions that people can throw at me throughout the entire chat. Before I get started, I am again going to give a last plug for this new online course that is starting tomorrow, looking at the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We're going to be looking at everything from Zionism, Palestinian nationalism, Israeli-Arab wars, the Oslo Accords, essentially trying to understand how did we get to October 7th and the Israel-Hamas War. The course is not about the war, it's about how we got to the war. There's 1 or 2 seats left, so I'm putting in some links. I'll be copying this again and again throughout our time together. Some links to my newsletter and to the course if anyone is interested. Happy to take questions, happy to see everyone there. But like I said, we are starting tomorrow. So if you are interested, please check out those links that I just set up there. So with that, I'm going to take a breath as more and more people are joining. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces and some new names. Please feel free, introduce yourselves, tell me where you're from, tell me if you're interested in something specific. I'm happy to try to cater what we're talking about to where you're interested. I will say if you have a specific question, I recommend prefacing it with the word question or Q or something, because sometimes a lot of people participate in the chat, which is lovely, but then I end up missing some of the questions. So with that, taking a momentary break, have a sip of water, and I'm going to let people say where they're from and say hi to each other as more and more people come in. And then we are going to dive in. Becca, you're multitasking a little bit. Take your time. The generations after me know how to multitask a lot better than me. Anna joined me from the Galilee. It is late there. Nice to see you. And the one ghost, sorry, I don't know your name. I just see your the handle joining from San Francisco. Lovely to see everyone. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to talk about is a topic that has been very controversial and is something that I've been asked about countless times throughout the war. There was a major development that happened this past week, and that is the casualty numbers. How many people have been killed in the war thus far? And I say thus far because while a lot of people are saying, well, the war is over, we're moving on, as we're going to talk about later, active fighting still happening in the Gaza Strip, people still being killed, Hamas operatives also still trying to carry out ambushes and strikes against the Israeli military. So the war is not over in that sense. The casualty lists are still increasing. And the questions of who do we believe when it comes to casualty lists became one of the, unfortunately, very politicized issues throughout the war. There were 2 main issues, taking a step back here. There were 2 main issues throughout the last 2 years that were really confusing people. One was the fact that the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip was reporting numbers of casualties. It was not distinguishing between militants and civilians. And this was a ministry that was run by Hamas. This was a ministry within Hamas's government, so a lot of people considered it not reliable. On the other hand, the Israeli military and Israel itself did not put out any of its own casualty estimates, occasionally would put out broad estimates of how many militants have been killed, but nothing more. Not about civilians, not about anything. And neither side was believing the other one. And this fed into a lot of protests, a lot of speculations, a lot of accusations of genocide, war crimes, a lot of defenses, etc., etc. Another thing that vastly contributed to the confusion, and this is something that's been raised to me time and again, is the fact that in the middle of 2024, the United Nations put out a new statement saying that they're revising some of the numbers of casualties because they were adjusting some of the numbers that were reported by Hamas. And a lot of people said, okay, this is proof that the Hamas ministry is actually lying. That led to a lot of confusion, and that was not the case. Within the Gaza Strip, there were two different ministries that were reporting casualty numbers. One is the Palestinian Communications Ministry, and one is the Palestinian Health Ministry. The Palestinian Communications Ministry was always known to be a propaganda arm. Its numbers were not considered reliable by any means. It publicized a lot of figures that then were widely discounted by a lot of different organizations. And those were the numbers that the United Nations also set aside. So when people say, but the United Nations also said you can't believe the numbers of the Palestinian Health Ministry, that's not true. That was about the Palestinian Communications Ministry. Over the past 2 years, people like me, who have studied this conflict for a long time, have said that the numbers reported by the Palestinian Health Ministry should be considered fairly accurate. And the reason for that, or there were several reasons for that. First of all, historically. Historically, we looked at conflict rounds that happened in the escalations in 2009, in 2014, in 2021. Some of these were Israeli invasions of Gaza. Some of these were just spirals of airstrikes. In each of these, the Palestinian Health Ministry was reporting the numbers of casualties. And after the spiral was over, those numbers were largely corroborated by Israel as well as by other organizations. So I said historically, the Palestinian Health Ministry has validity. A second reason why many people were saying Palestinian Health Ministry has validity, the numbers that are reported, is because the Palestinian Health Ministry was simply reporting, and forgive me, this is a little bit gruesome, was simply reporting the amount of bodies that had come through Gaza hospitals. It was not saying who's a militant, who's civilians. It was not saying who are children, who are not. It was not doing a lot of things that were feeding into the propaganda questions of are these children or militants. They were just accounting as doctors for the bodies and their identity. Based upon that, throughout the war, typically when people would ask me how many people have been killed in the Gaza Strip, how many are militants, how many are civilians, I would say, these are the numbers that have been reported by the Palestinian Health Ministry. That includes all Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. To answer your question, Becca, when you just asked, is the 70,000 reported Gazans only? Yes, these are the numbers that are reported in the Gaza Strip. In turn, if we look at how many militants were killed, no Palestinian source is reporting on that. The Israeli military was reporting X amount of thousands of militants, depends on when in the war, that have been killed. What happened this week is that for the first time, the Israeli military started to cite numbers that are matching the Palestinian Health Ministry. For the first time, this was reported in Israel, in Ynet, in Haaretz, and lots of different outlets. Senior military officials, in discussing how many people were killed in the war, started to say that the estimate is over 70,000 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip, not including those that are buried under the rubble and those that are missing. That is the exact wording of the Palestinian Health Ministry. Palestinian Health Ministry, as of this week, is reporting just over 71,000 people killed in Gaza, not including those that are unaccounted for and those that are buried under the rubble. So with that big development, a lot of different international and regional outlets started to say Israel is accepting the numbers that are reported by the Palestinian Health Ministry. Now, I will say, while that is to some extent true, the Israeli military did put out a bit of a retraction of those statements. And when a British correspondent, Piers Morgan, had reported on the fact that the Israeli military is now accepting the numbers of the Palestinian Health Ministry, the IDF spokesperson for foreign media issued a statement correcting what Piers Morgan said and saying, well, these aren't officially adopted by the Israeli military yet. The Israeli military is still considering and evaluating the situation. So, with that, what can we take away from this? First of all, Analysts like myself have been saying throughout the entire war that the numbers are reported by the Palestinian Health Ministry should be considered relatively reliable within the context of how reliable one can be in an active war zone. This now, to those that more saw those numbers that are reported by the Palestinian Health Ministry as something that was meant to demonize Israel, the credibility of those numbers, have now been somewhat substantiated in light of the fact that even the Israeli military is seemingly accepting those figures. However, again, officially not yet, but unofficially, this is widely reported in different Israeli news outlets. So likely we will see over the next couple of days more people denying this, but over time, likely this is going to be officially accepted as those numbers. That said, how many of those are civilians and are militants? Which goes to the question that was just raised in the chat. How do they distinguish between combatants and civilians? That's a very, very complex question. When Israel reports on militant figures, terrorists, militant figures, again, it really depends on the context, militant figures that are killed, what Israel says is terrorists were killed. It does not report what makes that person become a terrorist. Is anyone carrying a gun considered a terrorist? Is any family member of someone on Hamas considered a terrorist? Is any politician of Hamas considered a terrorist? That's not openly reported. That said, within that context, we can say that the Israeli military and the Israeli government have cited between 22 to 23,000 militants that have been killed in the Gaza Strip throughout the war. Israel has not given out official names of who those militants were. A lot of times this is just based on aerial shots and looking at who was holding a gun or who was in the midst of trying to launch some sort of rocket or some projectile, something like that. So it really depends how we understand it. But the fact is, the numbers that more and more people, I would suggest, should be citing are, give or take, a little over 70,000. Again, the numbers vary, but at this point, 71,000 people that have been killed in the Gaza Strip, of which the Israeli military and Israel say that 22 to 23,000 were, in fact, militant combatants. Again, I'm seeing questions of how do we actually define who is a militant? I teach a course at Tufts University on, it's called Terrorism, Political Violence. And one of the things I often say is, people love the word affiliate. He was a terrorism affiliate, Hamas affiliate, Al-Qaeda affiliate. How do we actually define that? We don't know. And it's a question also, to what extent do we trust reports from Palestinians versus reports from Israelis versus reports from international media? That all depends. And when it comes to the actual numbers, these are the figures that I would say people should see as relatively credible. And why this is important is, first of all, in order to understand the magnitude of the war and to put it in context and comparable frameworks. Lots and lots of people, certainly people I imagine that are on this live stream and watching the recording right now, but even more than that, everyone who participated in protests, everyone who participated in rallies, anyone who felt affected by the war, everyone was looking at this, the extent of the war and casualties compared to other conflicts. So this should be something that we look at and evaluate when it comes to proportionality, when it comes to the extent of damage that was done in Gaza, how many missiles were fired into Gaza, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I'm not going to get into, those of you who follow me closely know that I'm not going to give my own opinion on the politics of the different sides, but I will say, as far as I consider my job to try to bring the facts as much as possible, these are facts that, while until now I've been saying should be seen as relatively credible, they were usually in doubt by people who would trust more figures that were coming out of Israel. Now, to some extent, Israel is also corroborating those figures of casualties. That's the first thing that I was going to discuss as a development that happened this week. Again, I'm going to pause here if there are any questions. I see people joining from Indonesia and South Florida. It's nice, going around the world. Glad to have everyone here. Pausing here if there are any questions, any follow-ups before I move on to the next thing that is on my lists to discuss. Giving people 20 seconds. Thank you, Becca. It's very, very important. I've told you that my students and family, everyone laughs at how much I hydrate during lectures or classes. Meanwhile, I'm going to again put into the chat for anyone who has joined now 2 links. One of them is to my upcoming course starting tomorrow in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The other is a link to join my mailing list just to know when these live events happen or other courses that come out, etc. So feel free, happy to see anyone there. You can check out those links. The course does start tomorrow. So if you're interested, hit that link. Another 10 seconds before I move on to the next thing on my agenda. Any questions? Robin Hood, are you too late for what? Help me understand the question. For the live stream? Oh, for everyone to hydrate together, maybe? Sorry. I'm seeing the chat as it comes in. We're just getting started. You're not too late for the live stream. We're just getting started. We just discussed the casualty figures in the war, and now we're moving on to the most recent spiral that happened in the last 24 hours in the Gaza Strip. With that, everyone who has heard me speak knows what I keep on saying. The ceasefire is technically in effect, but there are constant flare-ups within the Gaza Strip. What tends to happen is the Israeli military has established itself on the yellow line. The yellow line is the demarcation area between where the Israeli military controls. It's about 52 to 55% of the Gaza Strip, depends who you believe. And the rest of the areas that are controlled by Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which is, again, 45 to 48%, depends who you believe. Where the yellow line is, I hope you can see this map, is roughly along here. So it runs along like this and cuts in here. So everything between that line and the border with Israel is controlled by the Israeli military, whereas everything along the coast here is controlled by Hamas. That is the current situation. What has happened? Israel has, over the last 3 months since the ceasefire started, 3.5 months, Israel has built, according to reports, over 40 outposts throughout the yellow line and the buffer zone, the area closer to the border with Israel, and is establishing itself in order to defend that perimeter. The yellow line is marked with yellow markers throughout the Gaza Strip, and almost every day we have incidents in which Palestinians cross over the yellow line and are then attacked by the Israeli military. Almost every time. The Israeli military says these were armed suspects that were endangering Israeli soldiers, and almost every time, Hamas and Palestinian sources come out and say, no, they were innocent civilians looking for food, trying to find bodies in the rubble, etc. We have had a lot of incidents of Hamas operatives crossing the yellow line and carry out active attacks against Israeli soldiers. We've also had some very substantiated cases of children in the yellow line looking for firewood who were also killed by airstrikes. All of that happening along the yellow line during this time. The spirals of the last 24 hours, however, were slightly different. What happened in the last 24 hours is there was a violent incident that happened in Rafah, in the areas not in the along the yellow line, in the area that is controlled by the IDF. There are still Hamas operatives throughout those areas in the tunnels, and 8 of them emerged from the tunnels. Some reports are they tried to carry out an attack against the IDF. Some reports are they were trying to flee. The commander was arrested actually by a member of the Palestinian militias that are working with Israel. There was a skirmish that happened. In response to that, uncharacteristically to what's happening in the ceasefire, Israel carried out a massive wave of airstrikes throughout the Gaza Strip. Those airstrikes included targeting an apartment in the western areas of Gaza City up here, where, according to Palestinian sources, 4 people were killed, including a woman and 2 children. Targeting a tent complex in the northeastern parts of Han Yunis, the areas likely in the Al-Qarara region, although this was not reported, just the northeastern parts of Han Yunis over there, where 8 people were killed. Also, the biggest attack happened in the areas of Sheikh Radwan, which is in the heart of Gaza City, targeting a headquarters of the Palestinian police force. That is the headquarters of the Palestinian police that is loyal to Hamas. In that attack, 14 people were killed. All told, by the end of the day, the Palestinian Health Ministry reported that 32 people were killed in those various attacks throughout the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military put out statements saying that they were targeting commanders of the Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They said that they were doing this in response to the violations of the ceasefire and those operatives emerging from tunnels in Rafah. And they said that, again, with regards to the casualties, they said that they successfully managed to assassinate a couple of those Hamas commanders. In turn, Hamas spokesperson Hazem Qasem actually issued a statement with regards to this escalation. He rejected the fact that Hamas violated the ceasefire and said that this shows that Israel is completely disrespecting the negotiators and the Board of Peace, and he called on the international community to restrain Israel and to stop all of these attacks. What is somewhat interesting is what happened several hours later, in addition to all this, which is that Israel put out another statement that said that the attack against the Palestinian police headquarters in Sheikh Radwan was itself not obviously a coincidence, but was itself specifically timed for the current weekend because, as I'm going to talk about a little bit later, the new National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, the new technocratic government, is supposed to start assuming control of the Gaza Strip as of next week. We don't know exactly how it's going to happen. I'm going to talk about that soon. And in Israel, they said that they targeted the Hamas police headquarters as a way of weakening Hamas's police force, while the new Palestinian government that is supported by the Board of Peace is supposed to take effect. Now, how does that work with this being a retaliation? This was planned in advance. Maybe it was a bank of targets. We don't know at this point. What we do know is this escalation is far greater than most of the rounds of violence. Even when we had a collapse of the ceasefire about 2 weeks after it was initiated in October, we did not see such airstrikes throughout the entire Gaza Strip. 32 people reported killed, including several children. And with that, now, theoretically, we're back to the ceasefire the way it was. But when this is happening, when Rafah crossing is supposed to open tomorrow, and when we're supposed to enter into phase 2, starting already tomorrow and or next week, it is just, again, one of the major asterisks that has to be put up. I keep on telling everyone, is Hamas going to disarm? Are we going to enter into phase 2? Are we? All accurate questions. And at the same time, we have to remember that currently, we're not in a stable situation. Currently, the situation is extremely volatile. Any one of these things can lead the region into another spiral and collapse the entire deal. Until now, surprisingly, I will say, these escalations have not led to an uncontrollable spiral, but that's surprising. And it remains to be seen how they actually continue. Pausing here to see any questions. Like I said, it's yellow markers. Another question, Professor. So let's say 50% belong to Israel and 50% belongs to Hamas. If they start rebuilding the Israeli side, are the civilians able to move back and forth between both sides? Outstanding question. The ghost, outstanding question. If the initial plans that were floated by the Board of Peace were to start rebuilding explicitly on the areas that are controlled by Israel, in hopes of drawing the Palestinian population out of the areas that are controlled by Hamas. And among the questions that people like me were raising is, and how are they supposed to go? Are they going to have free access across the yellow line? If so, who is going to stop Hamas from just coming in and taking over these areas that are rebuilt? The question has been somewhat made moot by the fact that, I'll talk about this at the end, that the new Gaza plans that were presented by Jared Kushner in the inaugural meeting of the Board of Peace last week, the new Gaza plans actually do not focus on rebuilding only in the areas that are controlled by Israel. They actually say that the entire Gaza Strip is going to be rebuilt as one unit. Then there are caveats. It says, well, phase 1 is going to be Rafah, then phase 2 will be Han Yunis. So clearly they are going to start really in the areas that are controlled by Israel, but that's not the official plans. And I don't have a good answer for you. How is it? What is supposed to be then the access of Palestinians to travel from one area to the other? And who is going to control this? And is it going to be controlled by Israel? We don't know. And I dare say, chances are it hasn't been thought of yet. They're probably waiting to see if this phase 2 rebuilding can even start. And they'll only start thinking about it then. That's my estimate at this point. Other questions? Can I comment on the impending strike on Iran? At the end, I'm going to try to talk about Iran if I have time. If I forget, please remind me at the end. I just don't want to get derailed now. There were a lot of interesting developments in Iran also today. You're absolutely right. Becca asks, is this related to the folks trapped in the tunnels? Are they the same people or did they get solved? And question 2, did they open the passage to Egypt? So With regards to the first question, is the incident in Rafah associated with the incidents with the previous events that we had, where there were a lot of Hamas operatives that were held up in tunnels in the areas of Al Janina and Rafah? Yes, these are those same people. They're still there. So they're not necessarily all living in the tunnels at all time. There are Palestinians scattered throughout the areas of Rafah. So maybe these are operatives that go into the tunnels now and then. But these are, theoretically at least, those same people. Now, when it comes to opening the passage to Egypt, that is supposed to open tomorrow. That is the thing I'm going to talk about in 2 bullets from now. So I will talk about the passage to Egypt and Rafah. So good question, getting there. Can I give an update on Lebanon and the West Bank? A lot of information. I'm actually planning on uploading a video this week about what's going on in the West Bank. There's some very interesting reports that were published in the last 2 weeks summarizing the violent activity that happened in the West Bank, specifically the increase in settler terrorism and the situation of Palestinian terrorism. So I will be talking about that. Probably not today, I'll be honest. I'm probably not going to have time, but you're right that you're due an answer to that from me. Hopefully, there'll be a recording later in the week. Milka asks, can Israel pause everything until Hamas dissolves? Great question. I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about the new Gaza plan, but the short answer is no. Israel actually does not have the authority to pause anything at this point, because the United States is the one that is driving everything home. The United States, the Board of Peace, the Trump administration is the one that is basically orchestrating everything. Every time Israel tries to hold it back, sometimes it does hold back, sometimes it does not. But Israel did not want to move forward with phase 2 until the last hostage body was retrieved. It was retrieved this week, but we're moving on to phase 2 long before that. Israel tried to hold up the entrance of humanitarian aid. The United States literally took control of that from Israel. Right now, Israel has no authority to govern how much humanitarian aid comes into the Gaza Strip. It's all done by the command that the United States has set up in Kiryat Gat in the southern parts of Israel. So Israel, technically, the plan says that Hamas needs to disarm before this goes forward. Can Israel actually stop it? I would say no. At this point, it's up to the United States. Now, Israel could appeal to the United States. The United States could hold up the plans, but that's where things stand. With regards to the migration out of Gaza, again, I'm going to talk about that when we talk about Rafah very soon. The one thing that I wanted to talk about before I get to talking about the Rafah crossing, which really is going to be the next thing we talk about, is just one of the additional facets that are related to the ongoing developments in the Gaza Strip and in phase 2 and then moving on in phase 2 and how Hamas is rebuilding. And it relates to the entrance of humanitarian aid. When the deal came into effect on October 11th, there began to be a substantial increase of humanitarian aid coming into the Gaza Strip. Then the Israeli military started to actually pause and downgrade the amount of trucks that were coming into the Gaza Strip, saying that they're going to do that because Hamas is not living up to its side of the deal and is not returning all the bodies of hostages. The United States really didn't like that. And within a week, the United States military took control of the operation. And right now, the United States is the one that approves how many trucks come into the Gaza Strip each week, each day, and also is in charge of their actual supervision. Now, their actual inspection. Now, why is this critically important? On the one hand, the situation in the Gaza Strip as far as humanitarian aid just pertaining to food and access to food and clean water, not the fact that the vast majority of the Gaza Strip, people are still living in makeshift tents and have no shelter, and the health conditions and school conditions, and it's a catastrophe. But just with regards to food, with the increased entrance of humanitarian aid, the situation did improve dramatically. And we've also seen not only more food in the Gaza Strip, but a drastic decline in the prices of food. That was one of the things. The scarcity was driving prices way up. Now, with that, the Israeli military over the last 2 weeks, but specifically emphasizing this in the last week, has begun to raise alarm bells to the Israeli government, saying the quote-unquote excess of trucks are coming into the Gaza Strip. The fact that now there is an abundance of trucks coming in with foodstuffs, more than the United Nations said was the minimum required, that fact is leading Hamas to take over more and more of the aid. And not only is it benefiting from taxes that are imposed on each truck coming in, Hamas imposes a 15% tax, and then it also taxes the markets, and this is how Hamas is increasing its wealth, and then obviously using that to also retrain its fighters. But also Hamas is using this to store the food for possibly later events of escalations. All this is said, all this led the Israeli military to say that Israel should recommend reducing the amount of trucks coming into the Gaza Strip to what the United Nations says would be required to stave off hunger, which is 200 trucks per day. Right now, about 600 trucks per day or 800 trucks per day come into the Gaza Strip, so about 3 to 4 times that amount. This obviously came under heavy criticism, saying that the United Nations says that the bare minimum to stop starvation in the Gaza Strip is 200 trucks per day, recommending that, okay, then only 200 trucks per day come in instead of allowing people a little bit of excessive access to food, came under a lot of condemnation on the one hand. On the other hand, also has to be taken into consideration that Hamas right now is very, very openly and publicly taking control of a lot of the humanitarian aid. This is not something that is being done clandestinely anymore. Hamas is the functional government in the areas that are not controlled by the Israeli military. Therefore, taxes that are imposed, merchants, value-added tax, all these things end up feeding the Hamas government, which then goes to pay for administration, but also goes to pay for the military wing. I'm bringing this up because very likely, as we see an opening of the Rafah crossing, next thing we're going to talk about, and as we see an entrance into phase 2, this is going to become one of the sources of controversy. So I'm bringing this up now because until now, the Israeli military in Israel have been complaining about it on a lower level. In the last 2 weeks, they're starting to scream it a little bit more. So it is something to consider. Pausing here because I've seen a couple of questions come in, so I'm going to scroll back up. If my mouse will work, bear with me. Question: do I think Bibi dropped the ball and not having proper end to the war, thus losing it to the United States? So, as all my viewers know, I don't give my own views on what would have been the right or wrong thing to do with regards to Israel's side or Palestinian side. It's very annoying to a lot of people that I don't give my own opinion. I know, and I am sorry. It is one of the things that I adhere to very, very adamantly. I will say that this is something that has been criticized a lot within the opposition within Israel, saying, and also some of the coalition members, especially more hawkish coalition members, saying if Israel had decided on its own terms to everything from establish a Palestinian state, to bring in the Palestinian Authority, to establish military rule and martial law and a new occupation, it could have done that on the ground throughout 2024. And Netanyahu's reluctance to actually put any of the plans into effect, because it would have come under massive condemnation or cost him politically either way, led to the fact that Trump at one point just decided, okay, enough's enough. And that's really what happened, objectively. Objectively, one of the things that are consistent about Trump likes to be very inconsistent about a lot of things. One of the things that are consistent is that he is unpredictable and extremely emotional. Again, my viewers have heard me say that many times. Unpredictable and extremely emotional. And therefore, he is capable, well, Russia and Ukraine, he is capable of deciding tomorrow, because Russia carried out a massive attack on Ukraine and he sees, God forbid, images of dead children, he's capable of saying, okay, I am now sending NATO forces to protect Ukraine. I've had it with this war. He's equally capable, if he receives assurances from Russia that there's going to be peace in the world, of saying, okay, I'm abandoning Ukraine because that's my way to get peace in the world. Because of that, Israel was walking a very fine line with regards to Trump being supportive of Israel on the one hand, on the other hand, also wanting an end to the war. And what ended up happening when Israel carried out the failed assassination attempt of the Hamas leadership in Qatar, Trump said he had enough. And that's when he came up with the 20-point plan. And very, very importantly, he did not develop it with Israel. He did not present it to Israel. The first meeting that he had about it was actually with Arab and Muslim leaders at the United Nations. And very importantly, again, I'll keep on saying this, when it came to the Sharm el-Sheikh signing of the peace between the sides, which is not a peace, but Trump calls it a peace, between the sides, it was signed by the United States, Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar. Israel and Hamas, the fighting sides, did not sign the ceasefire. They were not consulted about the ceasefire. This was signed by the other sides that imposed it on them. Hamas was in a position where it was very weakened and it served its interests. Did it serve Israel's interests? Again, the way Israel was framing the war, it's not going to stop until Hamas is defeated, then no. Others are saying Israel was not capable of defeating Hamas, and that became obvious, and therefore. So it's a very long-winded way of saying I'm not going to give you a straight answer of if I think Netanyahu dropped the ball or not, but I think certainly there is merit to the critique that ultimately what ended up happening in the war is an end to the war was forced on Israel by the United States and not led by Israel. Would it have been better or worse? That, again, is already a political question. So sorry, that was a roundabout way of saying I'm actually not going to answer. Forgive me for that. Other things that are coming in. What about natural deaths? So it's a question that's often asked. I'll be honest, I don't have a good answer on the distinction between naturally occurring deaths in the Gaza Strip and people that were killed in the war. I will say it's very hard to ascertain those numbers because obviously people still die of natural causes, but the complete destruction of the entire healthcare industry, the destruction of infrastructures where people were living, a lot of people have argued that even someone who died of old age or some complication medically at age 80, it's hard to distinguish that from wartime casualty when all the hospitals were bombed out and there was no access to food. It's an argument. I'm not saying it's the right one, but it is an argument that's been made. But I don't actually have an answer to the distinction between naturally occurring deaths and the actual casualties from bombs, bullets, etc. Trump's unpredictability makes the whole world wait for his news. I don't like this. Not going to give my opinions on Trump either. Don't give my political opinions on either matter on live. At least I try not to. Question: has the release of ISIS prisoner in Syria changed Israel's calculations? I'm going to try not to get into that just because there's too much. Ask me that again at the end, and I hope to get to it. Sorry, Syria is another one of those things that we should be talking about more, but unfortunately, just don't have time to get into all of this. Pausing here 1 minute to hydrate, as you know me already, before moving on to Rafah and the emerging into phase 2. Becca wants me to talk about everything all at once. I'm doing my best. Part of my blessing and curse is I can talk endlessly. Can ask my family about that. Next thing I'm talking about, the Rafah crossing. The Rafah crossing is the crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. It is the only land crossing into Gaza that does not lead to Israel. Israel, I'll just say since 2005, Israel has controlled all the land borders of Israel except for Rafah, has also controlled the air and sea. So Rafah was the only one where there was access that doesn't run through Israel. Rafah crossing was closed throughout the last 20 years. It was open, it was closed based also on revolutions in Egypt and what was going on, etc. Since the war broke out, October 2023, Rafah crossing was closed. Egypt did not open it, and Israel also said that if Egypt opens it, there's a lot of reasons, Israel said then they'll bomb out the crossing. Starting in May of 2024, Israel took over Rafah, and since then the crossing has not been open except for a brief period during one of the ceasefire rounds. As part of the 20-point plan that was put forth by Trump, in phase 1 of the deal already, the Rafah crossing was supposed to be open for Palestinians to both exit and enter. How this would happen, no one knew. It was supposed to happen. Israel refused to open the Rafah crossing. It was supposed to open already when the live hostages came back in October of 2025. However, Israel refused to open it. It said that Hamas has violated the deal by not returning all the bodies of hostages, and therefore has not been opened until now. It's been a major source of controversy until now. And then Israel was holding out on this until, this relates back to the previous point though about Israel being led by the United States, until last week in the inaugural meetings of the Board of Peace, the new leader of the Palestinian Technocratic Government, the National Committee of the Administration of Gaza, Ali Shaath, made a statement and caught Israel completely by surprise by saying, and the Rafah crossing will be opening next week. Israel did not know about this. Israel controls the Gaza side of Rafah crossing. Israel publicly said it did not know about this. This was arranged between the technocratic government, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, and the Trump administration. And then, as part of negotiations, about you're asking if it's going to be open to both ways, that was part of the negotiations that happened all week. And the answer is yes. The Rafah crossing is going to be open both for Gazans to be allowed to leave the Gaza Strip and also to enter into the Gaza Strip. How this is going to happen, I'm going to start from talking about the technical things that have been discussed, and then I'm going to talk about what's being rumored and what are the complications. Technically, how is this going to happen? First of all, the initial plan was to go back to the deals that were signed in 2005, where the Palestinian Authority would be the ones that are staffing the Rafah crossing. Israel vetoed that. It said it doesn't want to work with the Palestinian authorities. A lot of controversy around this. It's mostly politically damning for the current government, but also there's a lot of controversy about if the Palestinian Authority would actually have an interest in trying to control the crossing or not. Israel did not want to have that. The United States did want to have that. What they finally agreed on is a compromise that a lot of people have sort of laughed at, which is that the crossing on what's going to be staffed on the Palestinian side is going to be Palestinians that are unaffiliated with Hamas, some of them from the West Bank, but they're not going to wear official tags of the Palestinian Authority. So very obviously, these are the Palestinian Authority officials, but they're not wearing the tags or symbols of the Palestinian Authority, allowing Israel deniability that the Palestinian Authority is actually the one staffing that. So that's going to be on the Palestinian side. And on the Egyptian side is going to be cooperation between Palestinians, Egyptians, and also a European committee. According to what has been published, the way this is going to happen is it's not going to be an open crossing. Palestinians will have to submit their names for approval. Every day, Israel and Egypt will review the lists and approve who is allowed to exit, who is allowed to enter. And the opening in the first week is going to be extremely limited. It is going to be for the possible entrance into the Gaza Strip of 50 Palestinians per day, 50 Palestinians per day, an exit of 150 Palestinians per day. And this is something that Israel was insistent on, that more Palestinians be allowed to leave rather than Palestinians enter. Again, this is associated also with the political stances in Israel and all kinds of ways to try to sell this by the current government. Now, so 50 Palestinians allowed to enter, 150 allowed to leave, all the names approved in advance. In terms of measures of security, Israel, according to reports, is going to have cameras stationed in the crossing and monitor who is actually leaving. So Israel approves the lists, but it also monitors from remote who's leaving and control the actual crossing remotely. Entrance is going to be even more than that. With regards to the entrance into the Gaza Strip, Israel is going to approve the lists in advance, have that external monitoring, but then, after Palestinians enter from Egypt into Rafah, they are not going to have free access. They're going to be boarded onto buses and be taken to another checkpoint of the Israeli military. According to Israel, this is supposed to stop the smuggling of any weaponry, any contraband, anything coming into the Gaza Strip. So what has been published, this is before I talk about the other complications. What has been published is that's the mechanisms of exit and entry. Has not been published what are the lists based on if you just want to leave the Gaza Strip because you want to get out of there. Can you, or does it have to be a medical reason? This has not been published. One of the other things that are important to note is that the only people that are going to be allowed in are Palestinian civilians that are residents of Gaza. Israel has made clear foreigners, and specifically foreign reporters, are not going to be allowed in. Their access is not going to be permitted into the Gaza Strip at this point. I say at this point because, like I said, when it came to the opening of the crossing, Israel is being compelled to agree to this by the United States. Israel did not want this. It openly said that it doesn't want this and that this is going to end up being another route of smuggling, another complication for Israel. But the United States made a deal with the new head of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, and now it's happening. So all these limitations, I say for now, because who knows what will be next week. What I will say, though, in addition to all of this, what has not been published is what is the actual physical process for Palestinians, as relates to the question I was asked before, to get from the areas that are controlled by Hamas to the Rafah crossing. For that, you have to go through the yellow line and through the area that's controlled by Israel. Now, once again, technically, if the names of 150 people are approved in advance, there should be a way, and there likely will be a way, there'll be some sort of safe passage for them to travel from these areas into Rafah and to get to the crossing. That said, I am sort of raising a red flag here, and you've heard it here first. This is going to be another one of those situations that is going to be extremely volatile. Now, all of a sudden, when we have Palestinians leaving the areas controlled by Hamas, where they're not vetted for security, just their names are approved, going through Israeli military checkpoints, likely, because they're crossing the yellow line, to get to Rafah, and if all of a sudden, let's say 10 of them don't get there, or if one of them is suspected to be carrying a gun and is then attacked by the Israeli military, or what happens, chances are in the first couple of days this is going to work, but then we're going to start to see this becoming another point of friction. I'm not saying it's going to tear down, I'm not saying it's going to all explode. It's going to be another point of friction. The area here is under control of the Israeli military. Now, all of a sudden, the additional thing that's happening is with the opening of the Rafah crossing, we have Palestinian Authority people, not forces, but people here, and Palestinians entering into the Gaza Strip, to this area controlled by the Israeli military, Palestinians leaving the areas controlled by Hamas, where there's a lot of guns and a lot of hostile forces to the Israeli military, going through this area and into Rafah. I am predicting this is going to be something that might work with regards to the crossing opening, but it's also going to be another source of friction within this already volatile situation. With that, I'm going to pause for questions. Also, again, putting into the chat, if you've joined late, that my new course on the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is starting tomorrow. 1 or 2 seats left. We're talking about everything about how we got to October 7th, Zionism, Palestinian national identity, Oslo process, the Hamas taking over Gaza, etc. So you can check out that link in the comment that I just put in if you are interested. Going back to some of the questions, my understanding is that Gazans pay by giving, okay, this is more comments between the sides, sorry, not questions. So they're accepting applications for crossing. Great question. That's a great question. There is a mechanism for Palestinians to apply, but who actually approves this? Is this Israeli forces, Palestinian Authority, Egypt? I'm sure they've worked this out and hasn't been published, but administratively, bureaucratically, it's going to be a nightmare. And when that comes into an area where there's a lot of volatility and a lot of violence and guns, bureaucratic problems end up spiraling very often. That's a little bit what I'm trying to flag. Other questions? Okay, these are comments, interesting comments between the sides. Sorry for not reading all of them out loud. Just trying to focus on the questions. So, pausing for another 10 seconds, 20 seconds. If there are any other questions before we get into the last thing I want to talk about, which is the new Gaza plans that were published, and then I'll try to say 1 or 2 words about what happened in Iran today and any other arena I managed to maybe touch on. I'm pausing here for a moment. Any other questions? Last thing I'm going to talk about, and I'm only going to talk about this briefly because I already uploaded a video analyzing this in depth, is the new Gaza plans. The plans that were presented by Jared Kushner in the Board of Peace. And the reason that I'm focusing on them now, even though I already uploaded the video about them, is because technically they're supposed to be starting to be implemented already next week. So just a refresher of some of the things. When Jared Kushner presented his new Gaza plans, it surprised most analysts by focusing on the entire Gaza Strip. The plans are to rebuild all of Gaza, not just focusing on the areas that are under Israeli control. That, in theory, is a step towards the Israeli position, saying it's not just going to accept that 45% of Gaza is controlled by Hamas and just rebuild the rest of it. Instead, it's going to say no, it all has to be rebuilt. That said, this is also then conditioned on Hamas disarming, and how that's going to happen, no one really knows at this stage. When Kushner presented his new Gaza plans, they cover the entire Gaza Strip. They talk about rebuilding cities from scratch in the areas of what he called New Rafah, Han Yunis, New Gaza, and the entire coastal area in his plan involves 180 towers, tourism, multi-complex areas, data centers, all kinds of things that, according to Kushner, are supposed to cost between $25 billion and $30 billion. And according to what Kushner presented, the idea is to start having a lot of investments from the World Bank, from governments, but he explicitly said also from private enterprises and individuals who want to invest in the rebuilding of Gaza. So that's all where all that is supposed to happen. Now, what do we make of this plan? What Kushner presented sounds good in the sense that, I'm not even talking about good, what Gazans want. I'm saying it sounds good in the sense that the thinking that he said is, we are trying to build sustainable peace, that the idea that he thinks failed repeatedly in Afghanistan, in Iraq, somewhat in Syria, certainly Libya and Yemen, the idea that if you just end fighting, peace will emerge, that has failed. So they are coming up with this plan as a way to say you have to continuously invest in order to build something else that's sustainable. Regardless of whether we think the new Gaza plan is good or not, whether it serves the Palestinians or not, whether it is what Palestinians want, that way of thinking, I will say, is the right way of thinking, coming from a political scientist perspective. Thinking that if you just, and I've said this with regards to the attacks in Iran, if you just remove your bad, evil dictator, you'll suddenly have peace in the region. No, that doesn't tend to be. You need to rebuild the country. So the thought process that you have to do something and not just end the fighting and that's it, that is correct. Whether the plan is then good or not good for Palestinians, that's already a judgment call. But I will say that that unto itself is correct. How feasible is this plan? That already raises a lot of questions. Kushner said this is the Middle East. Cities like this, if you look at Qatar, you look at the United Arab Emirates, you look at Saudi Arabia, cities like this are built within 2 to 3 years. Okay, I would question that logic. Cities like this are built within 2 to 3 years, not in areas that have 90,000 tons of rubble and unexploded munitions, and 2 million people condensed in an area a quarter the size of New York, a lot of them suffering injuries and are starving. It's a lot more complicated than that. With regards to the questions, though, of if and how this is going to move forward, because technically, like I said, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza is supposed to start working. Unclear how, is supposed to start working already next week. How this is supposed to happen? According to Kushner, phase 1 is going to be in Rafah. So it is still going to be in the areas that are controlled by Israel, over here, where certain areas have already, the rebels are been cleared by Israel, and all the unexploded munitions have already been rounded up by Israel. According to the Israeli military, some 70% in this one little area. And then that is where they're supposed to start rebuilding. However, this relates to the question I was asked above. Israel has repeatedly said it does not want any rebuilding to start until Hamas agrees to disarm and actually disarms. The United States has wavered. The United States initially said that this is, of course, contingent on Hamas disarming. Then it said, Trump said in his inaugural statements on the Board of Peace, that the United States will be coming to an agreement with Hamas on disarming. That's already different than forcing Hamas to disarm by Israel, the International Stabilization Force. But now Hamas needs to agree. Hamas has openly said they're not going to disarm. And then when Kushner presented his vision for New Gaza, he had a whole slide that was dedicated to Hamas disarming. Now, again, I'm not going to go through all of it here. I did upload a video about that, I think, just a few days ago, so you can check out in my channel if you're interested. But I will say that the important facets, or some of the important facets, that were in that slide that had not been discussed before. One, he did say that the rebuilding is contingent on Hamas disarming. He said, otherwise, we won't be able to get investments into the area. No one wants to invest in the area that's going to be fighting. So he wasn't talking about Israel's desires. He was talking about the need for investments. But a couple of things that he did say. First, his slide distinguished between heavy weaponry and weapons manufacturing and light weaponry. And that's important because Israel said it wants disarming. His plan said the first phase of disarming is going to involve heavy weaponry. That's rockets, missiles, and weapons manufacturing capabilities. The second phase will involve disarming of light weaponry. Why am I emphasizing that? Because the concern that's being raised by some analysts and by Israel is that Hamas may give up some of its rockets. Hamas's fighting force is primarily not rockets. Its fighting force is primarily its army that has, according to Israel's latest estimates, about 25,000 fighters and about 60,000 AK-47 guns. And if they are going to be disarmed only later, that raises a lot of questions for, so what happens? Hamas gives up some of its rockets and then the rebuilding starts or not? We don't have answers for that. A second thing is that Kushner presented in his slide that disarming equals amnesty. And he said that people, Hamas members, operatives, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and basically Palestinian militants who agree to disarm will be given amnesty or safe passage to another country. That was the first that analysts like me have heard of that. Israel, at least according to all reports, and there's a lot of leaks usually that come out from all Israeli debates, Israel had never agreed to that. Has it now? Will it be forced to agree to that by Israel? Sorry, by the United States? Don't know at this point. But the fact that Kushner added those things is at least an indication that the United States is trying to think about how to move this forward. And I would say it's also an indication that it is, again, doing that without necessarily consulting with Israel, or just maybe consulting with Israel, but then deciding and dictating how it's going to be. And if it was up to Netanyahu's government, certainly he would not be accepting that. We don't know what Hamas is going to say about that. Hamas has said that they are willing to hand over some authority to the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, this new technocratic government that is led by Ali Shaf that's supposed to assume control of the Gaza Strip. I also uploaded a video about that already 2 weeks ago, who they are and what they're supposed to do. We don't know how that's going to be. If the new government comes into the areas that are controlled by Hamas, is Hamas going to actually hand over authority? Is it going to just pretend to hand over authority? Is authority going to, this is what a lot of people are speculating, authority is going to be handed over nominally, but all of the administration, including the police force, including everyone that is actually on the ground as part of the government, that's part of Hamas, is simply going to transfer over to be part of this. And that's a big fear for Israel. If all the Hamas police force just becomes all of a sudden the new Palestinian police force. There's more questions than answers that we have here. What I am raising is, in addition to the opening of the Rafah crossing, this is the thing that's supposed to now be starting. This past week, we had the retrieval of the body of the last Israeli hostage in the Gaza Strip. There are no more hostages in the Gaza Strip. Technically, phase 1 is now complete. So now we're all looking to phase 2. Is Hamas going to disarm? What about, no one's mentioning the International Stabilization Force, that international military that's supposed to assume security responsibility for Gaza when the Israeli military withdraws? Trump said we'll be hearing about it at the beginning of February. Maybe, maybe not. No one's mentioned that. We don't exactly know what's going to be there. What we do know is that the United States wants to at least show that it is moving forward with these plans. Likely we're going to see at least the Rafah crossing and some changes on the ground. How this actually plays out, as always, remains to be seen. Before I just take a few more questions, I'm again just putting in, because I see a lot of new people have joined, links to my upcoming course where there's 1 or 2 seats left. We're starting tomorrow. So if you're interested, please check out that link, and to my mailing list. I'm now looking at a couple of the questions that have come in while I was talking about the new Gaza plan. Trump resorts, a lot of people are calling it that. These are mostly comments, interesting comments. Wish I could sit down for coffee with a lot of the people commenting and actually discuss this more at length. Last thing I'm going to say, very briefly, the spirals with Iran. We don't know what's going to happen. Most of the protests in Iran have died down in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Some speculating that is because of the massacres that happened and the mass arrests that happened. Some speculating it's because the internet shut down. It's a lot harder to organize protests and connect with each other. A lot of other people saying that this has a lot to do with disappointment. Both the United States and Israel made many, many public announcements to the Iranian people. We're behind you. Go out and we'll support you. Go out and we'll help you topple the regime. And then neither one of them were willing to actually go to bat for them. So a lot of speculation about why. The fact is most of the protests have died down. Meanwhile, the United States is mounting massive amounts of forces in and around the Gulf and moving more and more aircraft carriers and aircraft into different bases. The United States is openly saying it would rather negotiate. Iran is openly saying it would rather negotiate. The Prime Minister of Qatar today traveled to Iran to deliver a message from the United States. It looks like both sides want to negotiate at this point, and at this point it would really just be a spiraling down and climbing down from the fences that they've climbed up to. Because issues like the ballistic missile program or the nuclear program, Trump is going to negotiate with Iran, Iran's going to negotiate with Trump. It's unlikely to be resolved entirely. Trump also said that Iran was going to stop the executions. The executions had not stopped. And we have more and more evidence that the executions have not stopped. That said, at this point, the United States strike against Iran without the protests also there to back that up and drive it home would be unlikely to also secure the same victory that Trump wants, a quick win. So we don't know. We really don't know what's going to happen with regards to negotiations. They're negotiating right now. It might work, it might not. With all this, all of a sudden today, Saturday, there were a series of explosions that happened throughout Iran. These happened in the areas of Natanz, one of them in the Bandar Abbas port in southern Iran. I'm meaning to print out a map of Iran here too to be able to point to that. Those explosions happened pretty randomly. It was very quickly reported that neither Israel nor the United States attacked. In Iran, there were all kinds of excuses made for each one of the different explosions. Some said it was gas leaks that happened. Iran then put out a very mysterious message denying that the commander of Iran's Navy had been killed in the explosions. I'll say it was very, very weird what happened in the last 24 hours, but it does not look like it's something that's going to lead to, it's not the final fuse that's going to explode. That happened since it has been already close to 12 hours. The situation seems to have died down. Was it Mossad agents that carried that out? Was it US agents? Was it lots of other actors within Iran? There's a lot of violent actors. There's anything from ISIS to Baluchistan rebels in the eastern parts of Iran. Not everything's about Israel and the United States. So don't know. We don't know. When I saw those reports in the morning, I thought it was the beginning of an explosion, but it does not seem to have been that. So at this point with Iran, the situation remains pretty much the way it was in the last week. Everyone's waiting to see if the negotiations succeed or if we're entering into another spiral. With that, we're just crossing an hour. I'm going to thank everyone for joining. It's always a pleasure to see some of the new faces and some of the people that I see week after week. If this is your first time joining, I'll just say I'm Alon Burstein. I'm Professor of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at Tufts University. Hit the subscribe button if you're interested in my reports that come out discussing everything that's going on in the Gaza Strip and in the region. If you have any questions, feel free. I'll be here in the chat in another few minutes. And otherwise, thanks for watching. And if you're interested more in, like I said, the different things with regard to the Board of Peace or the technocratic government, check out my last previous videos because I have a couple of videos analyzing that in depth. Thank you. And those of you who have signed up for the course already, I will see you tomorrow. Anyone else interested, hit that link. Thanks for joining.